and I'd like to thank all of our guests for attending our program today. So what you have seen up to this point has been the performance of Kirtan, which is the meditation upon the holy name of God with the aid of musical instruments, traditional musical instruments like mridanga, drum, and harmonium, and kartals, and cymbals. If you like, you can call the kirtan a religious function. And now we are going to read from the Bhagavad Gita and discuss one text from the 3rd chapter. So this is philosophy. Bhagavad Gita is a very famous book, famous all around the world, of transcendental philosophy. Philosophy without religion becomes mental speculation. And similarly, religion without philosophy is mere sentimentalism or fanaticism. For perfectly balanced participation in genuine God consciousness, we have to have both the religion and the philosophy side by side. So philosophy has been nicely expressed by the ancient Greeks. There's a famous saying in the old Greek language, gnoti seauton, which means know thyself. You must know yourself, know thyself. And this knowledge of the self, it must come up to the real self, which is in Sanskrit called Atman, this soul, the spirit soul. For by knowing the soul, by knowing the real self, one can begin to know God. So now we shall read one verse from 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, text 42, which explains the process of knowing the self. So in Sanskrit, this verse reads, Indriyani paranyahur indriyebhya param manaha manasastu parabudhir yo budhe paratastu saha. Description of the hierarchy of self-understanding. On the lowest level of self-consciousness is the level of these senses which are perceiving gross matter around us.
Най-низшето равнище в себеопознаването, това е равнището на сетивата, които възприемат грубите обекти около нас.
And above the senses is the mind.
А над сетивата стои умът.
Above the mind is the intellect.
Над умът е интелектът.
And transcendental to the intellect is finally the real self, the soul.
И трансцендентално спрямо интелекта в крайна сметка е истинското аз или душата.
Now to understand how all these work together, I can give you a very simple example which I have heard from my spiritual master.
И за да разберете взаимовръзката между всички тези неща, ще ви дам един съвсем простичък пример, който съм научил от моя духовен учител.
So I have in front of me 3 tape recorders.
Пред себе си аз имам три лостовища.
So these are quite obviously creations of matter.
И явно те са сътворени от материя.
And with my senses, I am perceiving these tape recorders.
И с сетивата си аз възприемам тези лостовища.
Now, if we played these tape recorders, played the tape, and let us say some music came out, then particularly with my sense of hearing, I would receive this sound vibration from the tape recorder.
И ако пустим на някой от тях някакъв музикален запис, тогава аз с едно от сетивата си, т.е. с слуха, ще възприемам тези звуци.
So then this sound, after passing through my ear, would enter my mind.
И след като този звук навлезе през ушите ми, той ще достигне до ума.
Now, the mind's function, according to the Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic scriptures, it is sankalpa vikalpa. The mind decides whether something is acceptable or not acceptable to the self.
Според Бхагавад Гита и останалите ведически писания, функциите на ума това са санкалпа и викалпа. Тоест да определя дали нещо е приемливо за аза, дали е добро за него или не.
So in my mind, I decide whether or not I like this music.
И така, аз със своя ум ще реша дали харесвам тази музика или не я харесвам.
And, you know, as it is often said, people have different minds.
И както се казва често, умовете на хората са различни.
So, the music coming out of the tape recorder, it may be to my taste. I may think, oh, that's very nice music. But somebody else who has a different mental taste, he may say, oh, turn it off. I don't like this at all. It's horrible.
И ако тази музика ми е по вкуса, аз ще я харесвам и ще я слушам. Но някой, който има друг вкус на ума, ще каже, изключи тази музика, тя звучи ужасно.
So this is just to help you understand the difference between senses and mind. Senses receive any type of perception, but the mind is deciding whether this is nice or not nice.
Давам този пример, за да разберете каква е разликата между ума и сетивата. Сетивата възприемат всякакви изразнения от околната среда, но умът е това, което решава дали възприятие информацията се харесва или не.
And then above the mind is the intellect, which tries to analyze what is being heard. If I'm hearing some music, in the intellect, different questions will be formed. What is this music? Who is performing it? Or my intellect may want to penetrate into the mechanism of this tape recorder. how is it that this tape recorder is making this music?
Как се получава възпроизводството на тази музика?
Are there some little people inside who are playing instruments?
Дали вътре има някакви малки човечета, които свирят?
Or is it some other process?
Или става по някакъв друг начин?
So this is how the intellect functions.
Ето така действа интелекта.
Now, how does the soul fit into all this?
И така, какво е място на душата в тази картина?
So, this soul is the source of consciousness itself.
Така, душата е източника на самото съзнание.
The intellect, the mind, the senses are simply instruments of the soul by which the soul can perceive this material existence.
И интелекта, и ума, и сетивата са просто едни инструменти, които използва душата, за да действа в този материален свят.
So soul, the real self, is pure consciousness. And another point is that the soul is a person. In the Bhagavad Gita, the soul is often referred to by the word Purusha, which means person.
Истинското аз или душата е чисто съзнание, но също така тя е личност. В Бхагавад Гита тя се определя на много места като Пуруша или личност.
You see, now if someone here were to suddenly faint, fall unconscious, we don't want that to happen, but just an example we're giving. If someone were to suddenly faint, lose consciousness, then we would see immediately the person has no consciousness, but we would also see he's not existing as a person right now. There's no personal consciousness. There's a body lying there, but that body doesn't make the person because the consciousness is not there. When the consciousness comes back, then we see the person. The person sits up. The person begins to talk. Oh, what happened to me? It was a terrible experience, and so on. So you cannot separate the personality from the consciousness.
Няма да бъде личност, защото вие виждате негово тяло, лежи и така нататък, но той не е личност, докато няма съзнание. И така, съзнанието и личността са неотделими. И когато той отново се върне в съзнание, той отново ще бъде личност. И ще каже, ще седне, ще започне да говори, ще каже какво ми се случи, това беше наистина ужасно.
He says, oh, this was what happened to me. This was a terrible experience. I think that's all I said. So it's, according to the Vedic literature, this pure personal consciousness of the soul is the proper medium for perceiving God. My spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, used to say that each one of us is a spiritual being. And as such, we are each a tiny sample of God, as much as a spark is a tiny sample of a fire. So, God, Krishna, is the supreme, personal, pure consciousness. And we are his tiny parts and parcels. And it's through the medium of consciousness that we can have a relationship with Krishna.
И посредством съзнанието, с негова помощ ние можем да контактуваме с Кришна.
2 days ago, when I was giving a lecture here, I gave the example of the medium of television. So there's a wave, a television signal in the form of an electronic wave in the atmosphere. So, you cannot perceive this wave unless you have the proper medium, the proper instrument. You need to have, obviously, a television. Then you turn it on and then you can see the program, see and hear the program which is being transmitted by that wave. A person who doesn't have a television, who never watches television, then he's not aware of this wave in the atmosphere at all. So, now just as the television is the proper medium to perceive this frequency, TV frequency, so pure consciousness is the proper medium for perceiving God. And if we don't have pure consciousness, then God is a mystery to us, just like that television wave. Some person without a TV set, he may even say, well, I don't believe there is such thing as television wave. Prove it to me. And you say to him, well, I can't prove it to you unless you have a TV set. Well, I don't want to have a TV set. So then how will he know that there's such a thing as television wave?
Богът може да бъде възприят посредством чистото съзнание и когато човек не притежава това чисто съзнание, което може да възприеме Бога, тогава за него Бога ще се остане просто една загадка, една мистерия, той няма да може да го види. И понякога такива хора могат да се питат, ами как да видим Бога? И ние им казваме, трябва да имате приемник, т.е. чисто съзнание. Те казваме, ние не искаме да имаме приемник. Как тогава може да видите Бога?
So, each one of us has this consciousness, but it is unfortunately covered. Covered in the way that is explained in this verse. First of all, it is covered by intellect, then covered by mind, then covered by the gross material senses. And this covering causes our consciousness to be focused upon matter. Now when consciousness is focused on matter, it becomes very limited. Not only that, it becomes dull. The consciousness becomes dull. It becomes exhausted. I'll give an example, which I think many of you have experience of. The example is of learning chemistry in school. In the chemistry class, you have to perform experiments. That means you go into the laboratory and you mix some chemicals, you do some some different tests. So I think everybody here will remember when you had to do these chemistry experiments, you had to focus your consciousness on these chemicals and study them carefully and so on. I think you found this, most people find this very tiresome, very boring. We usually come out of the chemistry course feeling very relieved that, oh, now it's over. Thank God. And then our consciousness immediately expands to so many other things. We're very grateful that we don't have to focus our minds on this little tube of chemicals anymore. Now, in the course of getting an education, going to school, you may have to take the chemistry class, and that means for some time you have to focus your mind on those chemicals. But hardly anybody wants to do that their whole life long. So, in the same way, there may be some use temporarily for us to focus our consciousness on matter through intellect, mind, senses. But what Krishna is saying in this verse is that we must be able to again withdraw our consciousness from matter and come to our real position as being spiritual beings. If the consciousness becomes steadily focused on matter all the time, then that is called Maya, illusion. Because by focusing the consciousness on matter all the time, then we forget who we really are. And we start to think, I am matter. And we become fascinated with this material world. We become totally absorbed in it. Now I want to give another example to illustrate this point. Some years ago, I saw a book on three-dimensional photography. So this book was full of many little pictures. As you know, in three-dimensional stereoscopic photography, there's always two pictures side by side, which were taken from a slightly different angle. And you have to wear some special glasses that they are put together in your mind, and then you see them in depth in 3 dimensions.
Имаше такива малки снимчици, две по две, които представиха една и съща картина, заснета под съвсем малко различни ъгли и вие трябва да сложите тези специални очила и когато погледнете през тях, ще видите предмета, картината в три измерения.
Now, this book was made in a very intelligent way to show the power of three-dimensional photography.
И тази книга беше направена по един много хитър начин, така че да покаже силата на тази фотография в три измерения.
That if you looked at the pictures without these glasses, they were very uninteresting.
Ако погледнете към тези снимки без да носите специалното очила, тогава те изобщо няма да се сторят интересни.
First of all, they were reproduced very small in the book, so they were hard to look at.
Първо на първо, те бяха дадени съвсем дребнички в тази книга и трябваше да се взираш, за да ги видиш.
And they were all in black and white. And you know, black and white photograph is certainly not as interesting to look at as a color photograph.
И второ, те бяха черно-бели, а знаете, че винаги е по-интересно да се гледат цветни снимки в сравнение с черно-бели.
And the photos were very grainy. They're very rough sort of reproduction.
И освен това, те бяха възпроизведени много хубаво.
So, without the glasses, you would not normally look at these pictures twice. You would just look through the book very quickly and go, oh, useless.
И ако нямате тези очила, тогава трудно бихте се спрели на тази книга, просто бихте я прилистили и бихте я оставили като безполезна, понеже тя изобщо не възбуждаше интерес на тези очила.
But when you put these glasses on, then suddenly each one of those pictures became a whole world. It suddenly had depth. It had a kind of magic. And you'd spend a lot of time looking at each photo. Oh, this is very interesting.
Но когато сложите тези очила, тогава всяка снимка, всяка моята снимка разкрива пред вас един нов свят, къде придобиват дълбочина и сякаш някаква мистерия и тогава наистина може да прекарате много време в наблюдаване на тази книга.
Now, apart from looking at these pictures, those glasses that you have to wear, they have no other use. If you leave them on your face and you want to do something else, immediately, you're practically blind.
Но иначе от тези специални очила няма никаква полза, защото ако решите да ги носите, докато правите нещо друго, да гледате тази книга, тогава просто ще се едноче сляп.
So, now, I want to explain this example in terms of what we've read in this verse. We can compare those three-dimensional glasses to the covering of our consciousness, this intellect, mind, and material senses.
Ние можем да сравним тези триизмерни очила с трите обвивки на нашето съзнание, т.е. интелекта, ума и сетивата.
And the pictures in the book are like this material world. So from the point of view of clear vision, when you take those glasses off, or in other words, from the point of view of clear consciousness, when you remove the covering from our consciousness, this material world is not very interesting, very attractive for the soul. Because the soul, as explained in the Vedic literatures, is sat. It is eternal. It is chit. Chit means it is full of knowledge. And ananda means it's full of happiness, bliss. And this material world is just the opposite. It is asat. It is temporary. It is achit. It is full of ignorance. And it is nirana. It is full of suffering. So for one who's in pure spiritual consciousness, he will not have fascination for this material existence at all. To give a rather crude example, my spiritual master said, the liberated soul views this material world like a toilet. It's just a place, a toilet room. You just go, do your business and leave. You don't want to stay there. Make it your home.
Туалетната е място, където хората отиват само за малко, вършат си работа и след това си отиват. Те нямат желание да стоят там.
But, just as when our eyes become covered by those 3D glasses, we suddenly find these pictures very interesting. So similarly, when our consciousness becomes covered by intellect, mind, and gross senses, we suddenly find this material world, oh, such a wonderful place. I want to stay here forever.
И също както, когато ние разгледаме тези снимки с очилата за три измерения, те изискват много привлекателни, така и когато нашето чисто съзнание е покрито от трите неща, интелект, ум и сетива, тогава на нас този материален свят много ни се харесва и ние искаме да го направим своят вечен дом.
So, that is what we mean by Maya. Illusion. Maya, the word Maya, Maya, means not this. No, not this world. It is not this world that is the eternal dwelling place of the soul. This Maya deludes us in such a way that we are actually trying to see this material world as the spiritual world. Although this world is temporary, we are trying to see it, or we are convincing ourselves, due to illusion, that it is eternal. Which actually just means we are forgetting that it is temporary, due to illusion. Just like we're always forgetting that this body is temporary. We're always forgetting that we could die at any moment. We take this body to be real, our real self. So, what this is like, there's another example. It is like taking a reflection to be the real thing. Because the real self is the soul. But when consciousness is reflected in this body, then foolishly we may take the body to be the self. Just like if you stand on a riverbank and you see a tree that's situated just on the edge of the river, and the tree has some fruits. So you will see the reflection of the tree in the water, and the reflection of the fruits there also. Now, it is certainly, we can all agree, I think, that it would certainly be a great illusion if someone thought, oh, such nice fruits, looking at the reflection in the water. Let me pick them. the result of that attempt would be he would simply fall into the water. So, due to illusion, he has placed a false value on that reflection. He is thinking that this reflection of fruit, this is real. I can pick them. I can eat them. This is a false value. So in this material consciousness, we similarly place false values upon our body and upon our possessions and upon this material existence altogether. Just like we think, this body is mine. It is me. How is this body yours? Did you make it? No. And can you keep it as long as you like? No. Are you even able to maintain it independently? No. We have to depend upon the arrangement of nature in order to maintain this body. In order just to live for a few minutes, we need to always be breathing. If somehow or other nature were to cut off our air supply, what would we do? We would all die. So how can we say that this body is mine? This is a false value. And similarly, then you can, from that point, you can just expand to all the attachments of the body, the house, the car, or the family members, the money in the bank. We all think these things are mine, but how are they mine if this body is not mine? So it's these illusory attachments that degrade our consciousness more and more. We become more and more engrossed in matter. I can tell you an interesting little story to give an example of this, how this illusory attachment degrades us. It's a story from India. So, it's a story of a man who was, his job was that he was keeping pigs. So he was always thinking of providing food for his herd of pigs. So one day he happened to come to a field where there was lots of waste products, lots of stool from humans and animals scattered all around.
поле, където е имало много изпражнения от хора и животни разпръснати наоколо.
So pigs will eat anything, even stool.
И понеже свинете ядат всичко, дори изпражнения.
So he thought, oh, this is a very nice opportunity for me. So he found an old basket, an old wicker basket, straw basket, and he filled it up. He picked up all the dry stool from the field, and he filled up the basket very high. And then, as they do in India, he put the whole basket on his head. This is how they carry things in India. You've probably seen pictures. And so he went down the road to go back home to feed his pigs.
Много добре с изпражнение и той ме към къща, като поставя кошницата в главата си. Така носят хората нещата в Индия. Те като стават в главата си, може би сте виждали на някакво снимки.
So while he was on his way, it began to rain.
Но по пътя до къща го стигнал дъжд.
And so the water started to drip down through the basket.
И водата започна да покапва в кошницата.
And of course, with the water came the stool oozing through the basket all over him.
И естествено, заедно с водата, по него започна да се стичат тези изпражнения, да се стичат по цялото му тяло.
Until it was covering him completely from head to foot.
И това го ставало от главата на петите.
But he was still running along, you see, with a big smile on his face. He was very happy, thinking, oh, I've got some nice food for my pigs.
Въпреки това той бил много щастлив и си потичал радостно по пътя с широка усмивка на лице и бил много щастлив в мисълта, че ще нахрани с нещо своите свине.
So there were some people standing by the road under a tree. They gathered under the tree to get out of the rain. And they saw this man coming, and they were very shocked. And they said to him, oh, dear sir, what are you doing? You're running down the road in the rain and you're covered with stool. This is horrible.
И отвъни на пътя, група хора са били послонили от дъжда под едно дърво и когато виделите, те много се изненадали и му казали, уважаеми господини, какво правите? Вие бягате по пътя с този дъжд и сте покрити с тези изпражнения от главата до петите.
And the man, he was rather irritated with their remark. And he said, what do you mean? He said, this is not stool, this is pig food. So this story is to illustrate how attachment, how this intense attachment to something, it places us in great illusion. When we become attached, when the soul, the eternal soul, who is pure, becomes attached to this body, then we actually forget the real nature of this body, just like that hog farmer forgot really what he was carrying on his head. It was just stool. When the soul becomes intensely attached to this body, then it forgets what the real nature of this body is. Just like the farmer, after all, I mean, looking at this body without sentiment, looking at it just through the eyes of cold analysis, you'll have to agree that the body is a bag and it's filled with Very nasty things. Yet we, the soul, we are carrying this around on our head very proudly. Oh, this is, and we will, if someone says, this is nasty, the body is nasty, we will say, no, it's me.
И по същия начин ние, вечната душа, вечната чиста душа, носим тази мъсотия на главата си и когато някой ни каже, вижте какво носиш, тогава ние се възмущаваме и казваме, но това съм аз.
Now, when the soul falls down to this low level of consciousness, of identifying completely with the body, of forgetting completely its actual spiritual position, then the soul loses control of its senses, these senses.
И когато душата до такава степен деградира своето съзнание, че започне да се отъждествява с тялото напълно, тогава тя загубва власт над сетивата си и тя не може да го контролира повече.
Here, in the beginning of the purport, the first sentence, Srila Prabhupada writes, the senses are different outlets for the activities of lust.
Също както в изречение на пояснението, Шрила Прабхупада пише, че сетивата са отдушници за дейностите на буквата.
And then a few sentences later, Srila Prabhupada writes, these outlets are not in use when there is superior consciousness or Krishna consciousness.
И с някакво изречение Шрила Прабхупада пише, че тези отдушници не се използват, когато е налице повече съзнание, т.е. Кришна съзнание.
But when there is this inferior consciousness of thinking I am the body, then the senses, our eyes, our ears, all of our senses become very much agitated by lusty desires.
Но когато е налице това по-нише съзнание това по-нише съзнание на тялото, тогава нашите различни сетива, слуха, зрението и така нататък, те
become very agitated by lusty desires.
Тези сетива започват да бъдат много силно възбуждани от похотливи желания.
It's our position then. There's an analogy, a comparison to a person who's riding in a chariot drawn by 5 horses.
И тогава нашето положение може да се сравни с това на човек, който се вози в една колесница, която е теглена от 5 коня.
So the soul is the passenger sitting in the back of the chariot.
И така пътникът, това е душата и тя се вози в тази колесница.
The driver sitting in the front is the intellect, the intelligence.
Този колесниче, който кара колесницата, той всъщност се сравнява с интелекта.
And the reins, which are in the driver's hand, attached to the horses, that is the mind. And of course, the 5 horses are the 5 senses. Now, if those 5 horses start to run out of control, they become wild, then the position is very dangerous. If the horses run out of control, then we can expect at any moment a disaster. The chariot will overturn, the chariot may fall down the side of a mountain. So many terrible things may happen. So this running away of the horses, this is the illustration of what is called vikarma. Vikarma means activities, sense activities, which bring about very severe reactions.
И това изпускане на понятие се нарича викарма или дейности, които водят след себе си много нежелателни последици.
So these vikarmas, there are four which are considered especially dangerous for our spiritual well-being.
И за нашето духовно благополучие се счита, че има 4 най-опасни дейности или викарма.
These are meat eating, illicit sex, gambling, intoxication.
И те са месоядството, воденето на забранен сексуален живот, приемането на интоксиканти и играта на хазарт.
So these kinds of activities, they lead the soul to lower forms of life. Now, we are perhaps taking this human form of life for granted. We are thinking, yes, I'm a human being, but according to our activity, we can, in our next life, lose the human status and perhaps become hog or dog or insect or something even lower.
И ние можем да приемем тази човешка форма, която сме получили за нещо дадено, но всъщност в съответствие с дейностите си, ние можем да получим някакво по-нише разлика в следващия си живот. Ние можем да станем свиня, куче, животно или коя да е от нишите форми.
So, the Bhagavad Gita is teaching this transcendental philosophy, the science of the real self, so that we can become fixed again in our proper consciousness and not be carried away by uncontrolled senses.
За да можем ние отново да се установим в чистото си съзнание и да ни бъдем отлични от сетивата си.
So by becoming fixed in our proper consciousness, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, we can understand, we can come to know directly what is God, what is Krishna.
И както казах в началото на лекцията, когато се установим в своето истинско съзнание, тогава ние ще сме в състояние непосредствено да видим Бога.
Now, Krishna, the word Krishna means all attractive, because Krishna is the reservoir of unlimited transcendental pleasure.
И така, думата Кришна означава привличащ. Той не е такъв, защото той е просто един извор от вечно наслаждение.
This is a very significant definition of God that we find in the Vedic scriptures, that God is Anandamaya. Anandamaya means He is full of unlimited happiness.
И това е едно много важно описание на духовния Бог. Ние го откриваме в ведическите писания. Там е записано, че той е Анандамая или изпълнен с блаженство, с безкрайно блаженство.
Everything that we are hoping to enjoy in this material world, we'll actually find in God, in Krishna.
Всичко, на което ние се надяваме да се наслаждаваме в този материален свят, ние можем също да намерим у Кришна, в Бога.
In this material world, there is nothing to enjoy in actual fact. It is just the shadow of reality or reflection. So an intelligent person, he directs his desires for happiness, away from this material existence and towards the Supreme. And thus he returns, as I explained, to his natural position, Sat Chit Ananda, eternity, full knowledge, full bliss.
ананда, т.е. на състояние на вечност, пълно знание и пълно блаженство.
So this is the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita.
Ето това е философията на Бхагавад Гита.
Now, someone may say, well, this all sounds very nice, but unfortunately, I find that my consciousness is very much fixed on matter.
Някой може да каже, много добре, но за съжаление аз забелязвам, че моето съзнание е много привързано към материята и се случва изключително много.
I do not see any way how I could ever realize this nice philosophy that you're speaking about.
И аз, за съжаление, не виждам никакъв начин, по който аз мога да реализирам тази прекрасна философия.
So, actually, that is a fact. That is a fact for most people. Most people are not like that great Greek philosopher Socrates. He was a person who was actually situated always in this consciousness of being, I am the soul. And he is known even today, so many thousands of years later, as a very outstanding intellectual genius.
Който бил постоянно установен в това съзнание, че е душа, той е известен дори и до днес с това, че е бил интелектуален гений, въпреки че е живял преди 1000 години.
So what about the rest of us? What should we do? Should we just remain in ignorance, remain in the cycle of birth and death? No, because the thing is that Krishna is very, very merciful to us. He has appeared in this world in a way that we can perceive right now with our senses. And that is in the form of his name, the spiritual sound vibration, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. The Vedic scriptures say, Manomayam Shuksham Upetya Rupam. To try to understand God through the mind, through the intellect, through introspection, is very, very difficult. Because this approach to God, you see, then God is called Shukshma. He's very, very subtle, very, very difficult to understand by this process of philosophical introspection. But God also reveals himself of his own accord. Matrosvara varna itishtavishta. God reveals himself in the form of syllables of spiritual sound. Matrasvara varna. In Sanskrit, the word varna means syllables. So, we have come to Varna, this city, to present you with these Varnas, these syllables of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra.
И така ние сме дошли в град Варна, да представим тези варни на Харе Кришна Махараджа.
Actually, it was Krishna himself who appeared 500 years ago as Sri Chaitanya, who brought this Hare Krishna mantra to the world.
И всъщност светът получил тази Харе Кришна мантра преди 500 години, когато дошъл Бог Шри Чайтаня Махапрабху, който е Кришна лично.
And his appearance was prophesied in an ancient Vedic scripture called the Srimad Bhagavatam, which was written down thousands of years before Lord Chaitanya came into this world.
И неговото появяване било преведено в ведически писания, записани хиляди години преди появяването на Бог Чайтаня.
So, in this Srimad Bhagavatam, the statement about Lord Chaitanya, I will now quote a Sanskrit mantra.
И това писание Шримад Бхагаватам така се нарича. Там е дадена следната санскритска мантра във връзка с Чайтаня Махапрабху.
So, Krishna Varnam, Tvisa Krishna, Sangopangastu Parshadam, Sankirtanaya Prayar, Yajanti Hisumedasa. So it says, Krishna will come. Krishna Varnam. He's chanting the syllables, Varna. He's chanting these syllables, Krishna.
И там се казва Кришна Варна, Виша Кришна. Кришна ще дойде Кришна Варна, като повтаря тези срички.
And he will come with many associates, a great congregation of pure devotees of Krishna, who will all be in transcendental ecstasy.
И той ще дойде заедно с свои придружители, много чисти предано отдадени, които ще се вечно подобени в екстаз.
So Lord Chaitanya's movement is called the Sankirtan movement, the movement of congregational chanting of the syllables Krishna.
И движението на Бог Чайтаня се нарича движение на Санкиртана или всеобщо възпяване на сричките Кришна.
And when devotees gather together to chant the holy name of Krishna, they feel the ecstasy of Krishna's direct presence in their very souls.
И когато преданодайните се събират заедно да възпяват Кришна, те чувстват екстаза, породен от нещото присъствие дълбоко в душата си.
And thus sometimes the devotees who follow Lord Chaitanya, they become overwhelmed with bliss.
И затова понякога преданодайните, които следват Бог Чайтаня, понякога те биват, те се потопяват в щастие.
So, Sankirtana Prayar Yajanti Hi Sumedasa. In this age, which is a very materialistic age, those who are intelligent, they will simply chant the name Krishna to realize God.
След това по-нататък се казва, че в тази епоха тези, които са интелигентни, просто ще повтарят сричките Кришна, за да осъзнаят Бога.
Because as I've said, today, nowadays, most people, they don't have the fine intelligence that is needed to discover God through philosophical introspection. But we do have the intelligence to simply open our mouths and chant the name Krishna.
Защото, както казах, в днешните времена, в съвременната епоха, е много рядко срещан този остър интелект, чрез който можем да осъзнаем Бога чрез това себеглъбяване, но всеки е достатъчно интелигентно за това да си отвори устата и да повтаря Кришна.
And thus, mantrasvara iti shtavishta. Shtavishta means manifested. In this way, God, Krishna, becomes manifested before us in the spiritual sound of His holy name.
И се казва, ето по такъв начин се проявява Бога пред нас под формата на духовните звукови вибрации.
So I would like to stop this lecture here. Thank you very much for listening so attentively.
Ще приключим тук с лекцията. Искам да ви благодаря много за това, че слушате толкова внимателно.
Now, this is not the end of the program, I must say, because we have a very nice feast waiting for you.
Но това не е края на програмата, а трябва да ви кажа, че ние сме приготвили много вкусни ястия.
This is a feast of prasadam, vegetarian foodstuffs prepared according to the Vedic recipes which have been offered to Krishna.
Ние ще запустим с прасада или вегетариански специалитети, които са приготвени по ведически рецепти.
And I am sure you will enjoy this part of our program very much because the prasadam is very tasty.
И след това те са били предложени на Кришна тези специалитети. Надявам се, че тази част от нашата програма ще ви се хареса много, понеже те са наистина много вкусни.
But before prasadam is served, perhaps some of you might have some questions. So you may ask them to me now. I'll try to answer.
Но може би преди прасадам вие ще искате да зададете някакви въпроси. Аз съм готова да ви отговоря сега. Може да ги зададете сега.
Yes?
Някой да каза нещо? In the Shastras, it said that Jesus Christ is an incarnation of Krishna. Is his appearance described?
Did everyone hear that question? Yes, so you can say it in Bulgarian aloud over the mic.
True. Въпросът е, казва се, че в писанието се казва, че Исус Христос е инкарнация на Кришна, написано ли неговото появяване?
Actually, yes, in several places in the scriptures, for instance, Srimad Bhagavatam, not Jesus Christ himself specifically, but the type of incarnation that Jesus Christ is explained.
Да, много места в писанията, Шримад Бхагаватам включително, се говори не точно за Исус Христос, но за този точно определен вид инкарнация, която представлява Той.
So in Srimad Bhagavatam, Jesus Christ is classified as Shaktyavesh Avatar. That means he's the appearance or incarnation of the power of God.
И в Шримад Бхагаватам Исус Христос е окачествен, подава в категорията на Shaktyavesh аватарите или инкарнации на силата на мощта на Бога.
Now there's another Vedic scripture called the Bhavishya Purana, which actually mentions Jesus specifically using the name Isa.
Има едно друго ведическо писание, наречено Бхавишя Пурана, в което се споменава и лично Исус Христос. Там той е споменат под името Иша.
So there it says a great saintly person from the Western countries named Isa will come to India and will visit some holy places in India. For instance, in Puri, on eastern India, Jagannath Puri. It is said he will go there. This is actually a prophecy. This Bhavishya Purana was written before the time of Christ, about 2,000 years, 2 or 3,000 years before Jesus Christ.
И тази Бхавишя Пурана, която е записана около 2000 години преди появата на Исус Христос, се правят предсказания за неговите дейности и там се казва, че една много свята личност ще дойде от запад и ще посети свети места от Индия, спомената град Пури, който се намира в източна Индия. Казваме, че Исус Христос ще отиде там.
So among Christians, there are some who believe that Jesus Christ did go to India. There is a period of his life which is not accounted for in the New Testament, from the time he was about 13, 14 years old until the time he started preaching when he was about 30 years old. What he did during that time is not known, at least according to the New Testament. But there are scriptures in India which say that during that time he came to India. Are there any other questions? Yes, this lady.
I for the first time such kind of lecture, and before I never heard about Krishna totally, and there was something that I couldn't understand. On one hand, you speak about the harmony of the body and of the soul, of the intellect, and on the other hand, divide body and pure intellect. And I want to put you a question. What is the difference between a living being, a human being, and a computer, for example? Computer who can be more intelligent than a man, than a person. The second, if you divide your theory or philosophy of the other, of the rest of the people who suffer, who live in families, who suffer from love, who are happy because they love, who have families, who have children, and you say about division, about giving up homes, partnership, friendship, families. Well, and how can you exist, suppose, if you are at the desert island? How can you exist? How can your God, your soul, help you to survive?
Okay, thank you. So I'll answer the question, and during the answer I'll mention her question. So the first point, her first question, was how would we explain by our philosophy a computer which is programmed to be more intelligent than a human being? Well, I'm going to answer this question from 2 points of view. I think there's 2 parts to the answer that I have to give. The first point is that you can easily make a machine that can imitate intelligence or imitate consciousness, but that does not mean that it has become conscious. For instance, for just a few dollars, practically anybody with a little skill in electronics and mechanics can make a machine consisting of a light sensor, which can sense red color, red light, with a little printer, so that when you turn on a red light in front of this machine, it will print out a message that will say, "I see red." You can build such a machine for just a few dollars.
улавят червена светлина и преди постъпването на такъв дразнител отпечата съобщението, аз виждам червена светлина.
But that does not mean that this machine has actually seen the color red.
Да, това е възможно, но то не означава, че тази машина вижда червения цвят.
This is a purely mechanical reaction. The perception of a living being of this material world is something quite different. Because, as we know, human being is poetic. He perceives things and these impressions of his perceptions, he is able to rationalize, organize, and express in very beautiful terms so that other conscious living beings can also appreciate what he has seen. Now, this brings us to the second part of my answer, that computer scientists, I have spoken with some computer scientists, and they admit that it is impossible to build a computer that will be, you have raised the question, more intelligent than a human being. But they say it is impossible to build a computer that will be anywhere near as intelligent as a human being. Because intelligence is not simply adding up a column of numbers very quickly. There have been machines that can do that for thousands of years. For instance, in China, they've had this abacus, it is called, this machine with beads. But, for instance, the intelligence that it takes to simply look at this microphone and organize that image in the mind and understand that this is a microphone is intelligence which has not yet at all been perfected by computers. It takes hundreds and hundreds of hours to program a computer to recognize a microphone from this one angle of vision. And now if you move the angle of vision just slightly, the computer won't be able to recognize it at all. So, a computer has to be programmed to recognize from each individual possible angle of vision this one object microphone. And then it still won't be able to recognize what this book is. So, and these things we do in an instant. You see, we look at the microphone, we look at the book, I look at you, yes, I know you. We don't even think about this. So that's the second point of my question, that I think the proposal you're raising is a total absurdity. There will never be a computer that can duplicate even the most simple intellectual functions of a human being. What to speak of even more complex things human beings do. And then again, I remind you of the first point I make, that just because you can build a machine that imitates consciousness, that does not mean that the machine is conscious. The consciousness, the imitation of consciousness is based on the consciousness of the programmer, the person who made the machine. He is just imitating his own consciousness in the machine. It does not mean that the machine has become conscious. And the second point, or your second part of your question, I never said in my lecture, I never said anything that we have to cut ourselves off from society. I did not make any point that we should not participate in family life. We should not have relationships with each other as human beings. Nor is that the consequence of the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. What I said is that we may be as soul embodied presently. We have intellect, we have mind, we have senses. But we should always remember our original position, who we really are. That is philosophy. Gnoti seoton. That is thousands of years of philosophy. Simply this point, that you should know yourself as soul. Yes, the thousands of years of philosophy have told us that we should simply know ourselves as soul. In the Bhagavad Gita is a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. Krishna does not tell Arjuna that you have to give up your duties in this world. He says, no, you have to perform them. You have to fulfill your duties, but do them from spiritual consciousness, not from material consciousness. If you fulfill your worldly duties from spiritual consciousness, then you will not become entangled in the karmic result. But if you perform them from material consciousness, thinking, I am the body, then the soul has to take birth in this world again and again and again.
тогава вие ще се оплетете в тези дейности и ще трябва да се раждате отново.
There was a question from, yes, this lady in the back.
Namely Krishna consciousness, we need a pure... добре. In order to achieve the high spiritual perfection in Krishna consciousness, we need a pure and strong body. Are there any physical exercises in Krishna consciousness, or merely reading these books and chanting these hymns?
Well, you should visit one of our centers. You will see that we have so many activities. Actually, the activities of our members are hardly different from the activities of anyone in society. It is simply that we are connecting all of our endeavors, all of our activities with Krishna in yoga. This is technically called Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. The vision of the Bhakti Yogi is that everything comes from Krishna. Everything in this world, its source is in Krishna. So a Bhakti Yogi, he works to reconnect everything back to Krishna. So, in our Hare Krishna movement, we have devotees of Krishna who are computer programmers, who are musicians, who are artists, who are construction engineers, who are whatever occupation you may want to name, doctors, lawyers. All of these activities can be engaged in Krishna's service. Yes.
Сега, знаем, че има оплодени и неоплодени яйца. Ясно защо не се използват яйца оплодени, защото това е зародиш, това е живота се унищожава. А неоплодени яйца, престъпление ли да се консумират? Неоплодени. Това е първи въпрос.
Добре.
Един будиш тогава, просто да не говоря.
It's just the first question. You have daughters of Krishna consciousness, so would you explain it? So we know there are two kinds of eggs, you don't eat eggs, so there are two kinds of eggs. The one kind is with embryo within, and the other kind is without embryo within. So why don't you eat those eggs that are without embryo? We understand that those with embryo, it's kill them and so on. Why don't you eat these without embryo?
Well, one thing you must understand is that our reference for what we do and not do, what we eat and not eat, is the reference of the Vedic Shastra, the ancient Vedic scriptures, Sanskrit scriptures of India.